morning, everyone. My name is Emmi, and I run a London-based studio called Studio EMMI. So I'll talk through my design journey with you today and kind of explain a bit about my geographical background and then more about other kind of influences. So originally I'm from Finland, and this is the first environment to influence me and my design. I also got my accent from Finland, in case you're wondering. I'd say I discovered graphic design through music, and I used to go to a lot of the local concerts growing up there. I remember looking at a flyer and realizing for the first time that somebody had actually made it look that way, that you can create things to look a certain style, like punk or disco or whatever really, and it really opened my mind up to all kinds of possibilities. I also get really inspired by that whole DIY music scene in general. You know, like the musicians, they don't only make the music, but they also create the album cover work and posters and leaflets and so on, and often sell it in the concerts themselves. And I find there's some kind of similarities in running your own little design practice where you're just in charge of everything, from creating the design and presenting it to the client, and going out there and finding the clients, and then also changing the light bulbs when they run out. It's not quite the rock star lifestyle, but you know, I still think there's some similarities. These aren't, by the way, the flyers I was looking at as a teenager, but these are by a London-based artist and musician, Liam Sparks, for his band Trencher. So I often hear people talk about Scandinavian design, or they mention that they can see it in my works. I don't really know about that, but I think I'm definitely really inspired by this kind of, or influence rather, this rigid insistence of living by the book that Finnish people have. There's a proverb, take a bull by its horns and a man by his word. And like any proverb, it expresses really well a commonplace truth about the place. Finnish people really insist on following the rules, and they do what they say they will do, and they are upfront and frank. And part of that is to do with timekeeping. So let's say you're planning a party that starts at 7, and you tell everyone to come at 7 o'clock. Then be sure to expect everyone at your door at 7 o'clock. There's no being fashionably late. It's like, it's 7, we party now, right? So growing up in that kind of environment and being really comfortable with rules and structure has really helped me as a designer, not only when creating systems and grids in design, but also just kind of general running of the studio and, I don't know, managing the design process. But I also think rules are there to be broken and challenged. So, at the age of 19, and that's 19 years ago, I decided to move to London. And it kind of puts my life in a bit of a 50-50 balance this year. A bit more about London later, as that's where my studio is based at the moment. But when I moved to a new country for the first time, it made me realize how much of me are actually my national traits, like keen interest in the environment and common good, and also that timekeeping. And in a way, it was quite a liberating time, because I could let go of those expectations that I had of myself and other people in terms of customs and etiquette. Moving to England meant that I also had to learn to speak English. Still learning, but it made me realize that language itself really influences the way how we look at things. In Finnish, for example, we don't have gender as in he and she. We just have one word for a person, hän. And I'd really like to think that it has influenced a long-standing equality in gender politics in Finland. So after London, I moved on to live in Brighton, where I did my degree in graphic design. It's an amazing seaside town in the UK. And on graduating, I moved to live in Italy. In Italy, I worked in a place called Fabrica. And Fabrica was set up in the early 90s by Taibo Kalman, based on a conviction that all cultures have the same value and difference is a richness to be protected. When I was there, they had 5 to 6 different departments, ranging from music, graphics, photography, and so on, and people from literally all over the world. And I saw all these different people creating all kinds of different designs, using all kinds of different methods, and none of it was right or wrong. It was just different. And it made me think that going through university had been a bit like going through an institution where you learn one way of being a designer. And Fabrica really broke that mold around me. So after Italy, I moved back to London for a couple of years, and then on to New York. In New York, I was working with Carlson Welker, and my time with Jan and Hjalti really broke the illusion of how a graphic design studio should be run. And what I mean by that is, I never quite realized that being professional could be so much fun before, and so much like hanging out with your mates. And I also must say that I haven't worked in any other country where people are as hardworking as here in America, and I really do respect that. So hugely, hugely inspired by Jan and Hjalti, I decided to set up my own studio, Studio EMMI. So that was back in London. And this is a picture of myself and Peep Show Collective. And they are a group of illustrators and animators I share the studio space with. And we're just painting our old studio in preparation of handing it over before moving to a new space the summer just gone. And it was really exciting times because you change the environment and it's new things and new possibilities. And I think all of us, when we arrive at a new location, we look around curiously and we spot things that look out of the ordinary. I'm loving it here in New Orleans, for example. I think we're paying attention to details that the locals wouldn't probably even glance at. And when a place does become common, then all those curiosities and strange things get lost in the everyday. I've now had the studio for 10 years, and I've been living in London for 10 years, but I really want to keep that discovery going. So I've started to look beyond my physical surroundings and kind of made a conscious decision to try and be more open to let the differences in each people I meet to influence me and my design process. Like, how can each client, for example, influence your methods? You know how we all have our own kind of practices and ways of working and methods of finding the solution and getting to that end result. And especially over time, we can get very confident in those methods. But I find that kind of also sometimes stops us growing creatively. And part of the problem is that us as designers kind of tend to use stereotypes. You know what I mean? Like, we choose red when we want to talk about something to do with passion, love or protest perhaps. White, this could be Scandinavian design. Something to do with technology. And now we're into politics. So the problem with stereotypes is that they don't always challenge us. I think they sometimes even chain us. So try not to get stuck in saying, I am this and I work this way. Try and find the unusual in the usual. And I think often a second look is well worthwhile. Like many designers, I collect something, and I collect notebooks. And this is my favorite notebook given to me by my sister. And it's the front cover and one of the inner pages, and I absolutely love it. And one day I realized if you fold the front cover, this happens. And that's just amazing. I love it. Look at that. That's at the core of why I absolutely love layout design. It's that kind of connecting thing between two elements. So when you work on the layout, whether it's for a brochure or a book, whatever, I think you almost design a story to go with it. So you choose your graphic elements to use on the front cover to introduce the reader not only to the content, but also to the design. And then on the inner pages, you repeat that element, and you might change the size or you might change the color, but there's some connecting things going through, and that's how you build your own design story. And I really enjoyed that process, and I just really love coming up with those connecting things. So I think the more open you are to letting the unfamiliar influence you, the more creative and surprising the outcomes can be. So when you work with a new client, aim to find out as much about the client as possible. Immerse yourself into their world, and be open to be inspired by previously unknown things, or even by the known things, just by looking at them from a different perspective. And I think a big part of that is to do with listening, and kind of also learning to listen in between the lines. So the client might be asking for something bigger or more colorful, but what are they actually asking for? Perhaps they are talking in stereotypes and they just don't have any other words to express it. So I don't mean you should just go along with what your client is asking and kind of suspend your judgment, but rather aim for constructive conversations, criticisms, maybe little disagreements even, in order to arrive at alternative solutions. At best of times, the problem can become the solution. So you can make a solution from the problems and frustrations and restrictions. On this particular project for Tate Britain, the client asked for more visibility for something that doesn't exist. So it was a recreation of William Blake's exhibition from 1809, and Tate brought all his paintings together from that time. And William Blake had also written a book that was displayed in the exhibition. And part of the brief was that next to the artwork, they wanted to display the caption and a page from the book where William was describing his artwork, the particular piece next to it. The problem arose when some of the artwork was actually missing, but they still wanted to showcase the text. So one of the solutions that I suggested was to just paint a white area where the painting should be. And they went along with this. But what made it so remarkable was that the largest painting of all was missing. It was over 2 meters wide. So what we ended up with was an entire wall of this painting and the caption and the text from the book. And then they even put this little fence in front of it to protect the precious artwork. Amazing. I love that kind of a thing. The client was really open to just go out there. So whenever I work on a project, whether it's layout design, identity design, or exhibition design, I try and show 3 different routes to the client. One that they kind of feel really safe and comfortable with. Another one that's slightly challenging, and the third one is that's just completely out there. Then there's the other side of the coin, where we as designers affect our environment and therefore hold a level of responsibility for our choices. For me, being self-employed and working for myself equals a lot of freedom, but with that freedom comes responsibility. So you have to define your own rules, and you have to define your studio culture. I think saying yes to the clients just comes with the profession, but I think it's also important to know when to say no. So I absolutely love working with clients whose message I really believe in and share. And one example of that is a project I did with Chrissy MacDonald from Peep Show Collective, and it was for the University College London Hospital. And it was very much an open brief where they just wanted us to create something in the children's ward, which was almost the entire floor, as you can see on the green areas here, and the young people's ward. And we decided with Chrissy that the best thing to do would be just to spend some time and listen to what the people who use these spaces would actually need. So we spent 2 months of the design time just talking with the staff, the nurses and the doctors, and the children and the young adults and their parents and siblings as well, because the whole families kind of end up spending a lot of time there. And then based on these conversations and little workshops that we run with them, we created our own brief. And we used a few of the peep show illustrators to help us to create the artwork. And this specific corridor was done by Spencer Wilson. We integrated the information design and directional graphics into the illustrations. So here the gorilla isn't just kind of telling you the direction to go, but he's also telling you in a speech bubble to press the buzzer so that the nurses can let you into the ward. Obviously, we had to get a double-decker bus in there. And then in some areas, when talking to the nurses, we found out, for example, about this corridor that was just kind of a dead-end corridor, and it wasn't marked in those original plans or anything. But they told us that the physiotherapists use this space in order to kind of just walk up and down it with the children after they've had their surgeries in order to rebuild their muscle. So we really wanted to make it a bit more fun of an experience. So with this illustration, the physiotherapist can tell the children to just, can you walk another green stripe, or can you just make it to the flowers, and so on. And in the playroom, in Lucy Vicross's illustration, we hid games in there like what doesn't belong and 1, 2, 3, and so on. And we also had, in a few of the rooms, custom designed and built furniture, like here for the storage cupboard. I think this is quite an obvious example of design for good. But for me, ethical design doesn't mean that you have to follow rigid moral codes. For me, responsible design means positive contribution to society and planet. But I think society's opinion about what's right and wrong and what's ethical and unethical changes over time. So for me, all those decisions are kind of based on my personal consciousness. And like I mentioned before, saying no to the clients can become a bit tricky, but I have turned down work due to moral reasons. So I think it's all about having an ethos that is expressed in your actions through client communications, studio environments and client lists, and sustainable relationships with clients. So these days, I still very much get inspired by music. And not least when you just put your headphones on to get on with the work. But I get huge inspiration by sound system dances. And not least because of the graphic beauty of the sound boxes. But this is a picture of London-based Channel 1 Sound. And the UK has a long-standing history of custom-built, unique sound systems. And again, I really draw inspiration from its DIY culture, and it encourages me to carry on my own practice. So I live in London because all this variety of music it has to offer, but also because it has so many opportunities. In London, a designer can really specialize and work in a certain sector, and that's a privilege that a designer in Finland just couldn't have, for example, because the population is just 5.5 million. So I'm running out of time here, or kind of heading to my last minute, so I'll just leave you with 2 thoughts. Be open to have a conversation that could change things and challenge your creative methods. What is the conversation with colleagues or clients that could improve my design process and studio culture I am in? Ask yourself, do I have the courage to hear the things that will challenge the way I am as a designer? To question your own methods can feel uncomfortable, but I would encourage you to be brave. So thank you.
So, I automatically connect with anyone who draws inspiration from punk culture. And also, so I'm really intrigued by this idea of where you're from. Finland has a pretty monoculture. It's
Yes.
pretty, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're in this city of London, which 204 languages are spoken in London. Is this the key to sort of the awareness? I mean, does it help you?
Yeah, I would think it really helps.
Yeah.
So I would really encourage anyone, if you have the opportunity to, you know, live somewhere else for a bit, or travel, or
Yeah.
you know. Or
And so there's a strange thing that happens. So like a lot of what you're doing is trying to be open. So I do this for a living because I had to design my life so that I would actually talk to people. I don't do this naturally. I know that sounds weird and masochistic, but it's true. Like if you met me, you could know me for like a year and not know what I do. I don't talk about myself and that sort of thing. And so, but the practice of design also is like, I think to do it successfully the way you've been doing it is to go out and be aware and talk to people and communicate with people.
Yes. Yeah.
And so like, tell me how do you keep that active? Like, how do you make that, because it's necessary for your job. So how do you make yourself do it? How do you make yourself talk to those people in the 200 languages in London?
Well, I just kind of stop and talk to people on the street. So I go to the shop and I start a conversation. And one thing that works really well is actually, because I cycle everywhere in London and you have to stop at the red lights. So anyone who stops next to you, there's always a conversation going for some reason.
Really?
Yeah, it's quite good. A short conversation though. So the longer conversations kind of happen in the buses and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to just talk to people who, you know, aren't part of your world and just kind of look different and have different, you know, like in my circle of friends, a lot of them are designers. So I think it's very important to balance that with, you know, reaching out and trying to understand what people outside that bubble think and do, and you know, why they behave the way they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a part of research.
Yes.
You know, it's
Yeah.
really necessary.
Yeah.
Are there examples of that? I mean, you mentioned some in your work where that's been really critical to how you've done and achieved what you've done. Just like the ability, you know, just being open to noticing something, anything like that you can give.
Sorry,
Is there any sort of example from
examples?
your work where like one of those conversations or one of those little things you noticed?
I think actually, because a lot of my clients, in fact all of them, they're kind of cultural institutions or charities or art organizations, and their audience is kind of, you know, everyone in London. It's not just a specific sector. So I think it's really important to know the issues that are kind of hot topics in any other communities at the moment. So what are people worried about, or what concerns them, or, you know, how do they see development in a certain area that other people might see positive, they might see negative, and then kind of being able to address that through the design so that it feels inclusive rather than exclusive, really. Yeah.
And is there sometimes when so if you work with cultural institutions and also national entities, you know, I was talking about designing flags earlier, that one of the problems with designing flags is that there are so many stakeholders, like everyone has an opinion about it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you can have too much. Like, how do you balance trying to be open, trying to listen to people, but also like doing your job and being confident that you're making the one decision, because no one wants you to make the one decision.
Yeah. I think what really helps is this, because my studio is kind of like a boutique studio, so I deal with all the clients. So I have a very close relationship with the person on the other end of the phone, or, you know, whoever I deal with. And sometimes it's a real luxury where they are organized enough internally where I only need to speak to one person and they kind of shield me from all the other opinions and things that happen behind the stage. But other times I might just kind of have to tell them, like, listen, just kind of go and sort yourself out. Have a little think about this one, and then come back to me when you have
one perspective, one point of view.
So I suppose the being open comes into the picture when, when I think about the creative side of things, rather than the kind of, okay, I need a brief so I know what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a way that I am also addicted to that steno pad with the pencil and the line, and like noticing those things.
Yeah.
Is like that gives me an inordinate amount of joy during the day when I discover those things. And people often ask me when doing the show, how do you know, where do you come up with your ideas? And the ideas are everywhere.
Yes.
But how do you sort of keep noticing? What is that practice about? Or, is it like something you have to turn on or off? Is there a way that, noticing those little things and folding the papers to notice that the lines match up? What does that in everyday life look like?
I don't know. I think I just, like all of us, I presume or think that we just pay attention to things that look a bit curious, a bit out of the ordinary. Mm-hmm. So you go and poke it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I recommend poking things.
Yeah.
And so this connection to DIY culture, and it is kind of funny when you see the flyers that are black and white, stark, and have the Xerox marks.
Good old photocopy, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so what about that resonated? Because it's something about it resonated with me too. What is it about that, and how do you carry that on? And I'm really into this idea of creating your studio in the same mold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really just about kind of, like I mentioned, that Finland has given me this kind of structured lifestyle, and you grow up in a country where it's quite clear the path that you're supposed to be taking, and you're almost very guided into, you go to school and then you do this and then this follows. And then through this kind of music scene, I realized, hold on a minute, I can make decisions for myself, and I can just say, I'm going to be this, or I'm going to do that, and then just make it happen. So I kind of don't have to wait for anyone else to do anything for me. And that has been a huge realization, as a teenager, that, okay, I don't need a teacher to show me the direction.
And what are I know lots of downsides with that too, doing it all yourself. What are the downsides of that?
Stress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lonely.
I mean, did you when you do everything yourself, you begin to discover things that maybe they're not the reasons why you started this. Are there things that you found that you kind of love the business part of it? You kind of love doing, the quicken.
I love filling forms, stamping things. It's so satisfying. It's really good. So I do all my tax returns myself. That sounds terrible. I don't really enjoy it, but it's it's a box that I can fill in.
Right.
It's great.
Something you control in that little box.
Yeah.
All the chaos in the
I'm
world.
not going to take any accounting clients, though. So it's personal. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the great things about the whole DIY, and I think a lot of you, you own your own businesses, you're your own consultant, and it's kind of fun to discover all those things that are you don't get into this because you really want to do, business stuff, whatever. But it's a fun part of, figuring that stuff out is a fun part of the job.
Yes.
And also the autonomy of it is kind of amazing. So how do you guide this you mentioned that there's a few things that ethically you wouldn't do.
I knew you were going to go there.
Yeah, so what have you said no to? Without naming names.
I knew you were going to ask this. I feel a bit uncomfortable of giving a list because I really think it's quite personal and I don't want anyone to feel like you should say no to certain things. But I think, for example, one thing was a new business. It was a guy who got in touch from LA some years ago, and he was starting up, it was a startup, of an online platform, kind of like YouTube, where you can upload videos, but you could also upload sound files and photos. so anything. And his kind of unique selling point was that there's no censorship. So I just kind of went, well, like, no censorship at all? And he's like, yeah, isn't that amazing? And I thought, well, so, you know, I was thinking all these horrible things, and then I just asked him, like, so for example, you know, if a parent gets in touch to say, there's a video of my child being bullied, I'm like, you will take it down, won't you? And he's like, no, that's the thing, we won't. Isn't it amazing? And I was like, no, it's not. Like, sorry, I'm not going to do this. And I got such an abusive email from him, like, you'll never succeed in life and all this. And I thought, sorry, censor you from my inbox. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.